Hello everyone, Melderon TV here. Welcome to another classic and vanilla WoW Shaman guide. So, you've either decided to level a Shaman, or at least are interested in leveling one. Great to hear. But, before heading out into the world of Azeroth and bringing balance back to the elements, I would suggest really picking a leveling spec that both makes sense to you and allows you to achieve your leveling aspirations. With Classic coming, I think it's a good idea to at least get somewhat prepared for your leveling adventure. As you may be surprised to hear, there are many more options than just the proverbial two-handed Wind Fury enhancement spec when it comes to leveling. In fact, in my opinion, there are viable leveling specs in every talent specialization, even Restoration. In fact, there are a total of 6 builds that I would like to discuss. Restoration, two-handed Wind Fury enhancement with both a fast weapon and a slow weapon, Elemental, and finally a hybrid Elemental enhancement spec. For each of these builds, I'll provide you with average DPS statistics that I gathered on my level 54 Shaman, Oakenhorn. I would argue that a character in this level range will provide a good comparison between specs for 3 main reasons. The first is that at level 54, DPS estimates will not be inflated by higher end dungeon blues and BIS pieces. Second, the mid-50s is high enough so that the effects of all the primary talent specialization choices will be represented. And finally, getting DPS estimates on a higher level character will allow me to fight mobs 10 levels below me, so that I can limit the chance of missing attacks and therefore provide you with what each build has to offer at its maximum output so accurate comparisons can be made among specs. Alright, enough of that, let's get on with the specs. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that all talent builds provided assume a 1.12 talent system at the launch of Classic. The first spec I would like to cover is the Classic two-handed Wind Fury builds. Both the slow and fast weapon builds look like this for the enhancement tree. After you get to Stormstrike, now you have the choice to fill the rest of the talent points in either Restoration or Elemental. Elemental will of course provide you with more DPS, but Restoration will provide you with more survivability and utility. For all of the primary enhancement talent builds I will discuss here, the filler spec I used when gathering DPS data was the Restoration tree. So here are the 2 build options with Elemental on the left and Restoration on the right. With all these builds, I recommend filling up your primary tree, in this case enhancement, before moving into quote-unquote the filler tree. Stats you want to shoot for as enhancement shaman are strength or attack power, agility, and stamina in that order. Of course, both hit and crit rating increases are nice, but they are rare while leveling. As far as rotation goes, I suggest doing the following for enhancement builds. Before the pull, make sure a Wind Fury weapon, or a Rock Biter if you're below level 30, is on your weapon and Lightning Shield is up. Next, drop Strength of Earth and Grace of Air if you are above level 42. Time to pull. To pull, select the mob and cast Flame Shock and drop Searing Totem while the mob is coming to you so that you can maximize the time Searing is up. Next, cast Stormstrike when the mob gets in melee range, or you get into its melee range, and then just auto-attack the mob and prey on Wind Fury procs. As with all enhancement shaman, you want to front load your damage and spend the rest of the fight regenning mana, abusing the 5-second rule. This will minimize your downtime. I would not recast any shocks after the initial flame shock, nor would I reactivate Lightning Shield when it falls off unless it is an emergency or if multiple mobs are attacking you. Use your auto attacks and Wind Fury to bring the mob down. This procedure will allow you to kill 2 to 4 mobs without drinking. Okay, let's look at the numbers. For all the DPS averages I calculated, the data were gathered from killing these Fray Feather Hippogriffs in Feralis, which are either level 43 or 44. Also regarding the 3 enhancement builds I will be discussing, for all of the pulls, I strictly follow the rotation I described above. Here are the weapons I used for this test. Average DPS for two-handed Wind Fury with a slow weapon is higher than two-handed Wind Fury with a fast weapon, but this difference is not significant at a 0.05 alpha threshold with a p-value of 0.73. If you haven't had statistics yet, or simply forget, don't worry, I forget all the time, all this means is that I am only 27% confident that there is actually a difference between the 2 groups. Or you could say that there's a 73% chance that we would have gotten the same results by just dumb luck. That is not very confident. I will provide p-values and statistics for all possible pairwise comparisons between the builds later in the video. An alpha threshold of 0.05 is widely used in all disciplines of science, so we will use that statistical cutoff here. It would seem that you may get a slight DPS increase from a slower weapon, but there is something I would like to point out, however. You see, the standard deviation of two-handed Wind Fury with a slow weapon is much higher than Wind Fury with a fast weapon. All this means is that the DPS of each pull is more likely to be farther away from the actual mean, or average, with a slow weapon when compared to a fast weapon. This is due to the larger range of damage a slow weapon can do, paired with the inconsistency of Wind Fury weapon. Basically, if you don't like huge swings in variability, but still want to see the big hits a Wind Fury build can provide, I suggest going with a faster weapon. But if you really want to get the most out of this build and aren't scared to roll the dice, if you will, a slow weapon is better, especially for PvP. I also tested what the DPS would be like if you want something a little more stable or if you are below level 30. Rockbiter Enhancement fits better with two-handed weapons as they are slower than one-handers. Rockbiter scales better the slower the weapon is. As you can see, there isn't a significant difference between the DPS estimates for both slow and fast two-handed weapons, but there is still about a 20-point DPS decrease on average. However, as you can see, the standard deviation with Rockbiter is much lower. So, if you hate RNG but love two-handers, Rockbiter may be the way to go for you. Just be careful using Rockbiter in group content, as it creates a good amount of threat and you can pull off a tank. Just a warning. Next, let's go over the dagger and shield build. The selling points of this build are its high survivability with a shield and its consistent non-spiky DPS. The talent build is very similar to the two-handed Windfury build, with the only difference being that you will have an extra talent point as you will not take two-handed weapons. The rotation for this build is exactly the same as in two-handed, with the exception that you will be primarily using Flame Tongue weapon instead of Windfury. Flame Tongue scales very well with one-handers, with the DPS increasing the faster the weapon is. Since daggers are the fastest weapon you can usually find, you will use them for this build. This is the dagger I had equipped while gathering the DPS data. The DPS is a bit lower than with two-handers. The difference between dagger and shield and a fast two-hander is non-significant, but there does exist a significant difference by a rather large margin between dagger and shield and Windfury with a slow two-hander. But look how low the standard deviation is. The DPS output of this build is much more consistent than both two-handed builds. Something to consider if you don't like RNG-based builds. In addition to Flame Tongue, many people on forums and other media swear by Windfury weapon on their dagger with this build. And, surprisingly enough, I tested it and found a non-significant increase in DPS, and standard deviation though, with Windfury on the dagger. So, there is a potential for more damage, but as with two-handed Windfury, you'll be rolling the dice. That being said, however, Windfury weapon is excellent in situations where the mob you are attacking may be resistant to fire damage. Well, that covers the enhancement builds. Basically, if consistency is for you, I would suggest either a two-handed build with Rockbiter weapon or the dagger and shield build with Flame Tongue weapon. If you are the kind of person who likes to live on the edge and two-hit coffees, then Windfury is your friend. The beauty about Shaman is that you can switch weapon enhancements whenever you want. I personally like to use daggers out in the open world with Flame Tongue and two-handers with Windfury if I do get the chance to actually DPS in dungeons. If you are like me and want to have every weapon at your disposal, I suggest this build as it provides you with the ability to wield two-handers and provides more survivability with shields. Okay, let's move on to Elemental. Elemental is all about burst and killing your enemy before it even gets the chance to touch you. The build I use to test its DPS is here, complete with Elemental Mastery. There is also another build you can choose which sacrifices Elemental Mastery for Nature's Swiftness. For me, this is actually a hard choice. A guaranteed free critical hit or an instant cast lightning spell. I think you see the dilemma. As far as stats, make sure to stack Intellect and Stamina in that order. Also be on the lookout for some bonus damage gear with this build. It's rare before level 40, but grab it if you can. I will say that before going into the rotation in DPS numbers, playing Elemental is sure fun, but man, do you drink a lot. Instead of the 2 to 4 mob kills before drinking I'm used to with Enhancement, I only kill about 1 to 2 mobs before having to drink with Elemental. Also, as Intellect gear is mostly cloth, you will be squishy. Survivability is a big part of leveling, and the more damage you take, the more you will heal and subsequently have to drink. Just some things to keep in mind if you decide to level Elemental. Some people suggest even switching to Elemental from Enhancement at 40, after you get all of the core abilities Elemental has to offer. Also, your gear will be potentially better at higher levels. As far as the rotation goes, I suggest dropping Earthbind just outside the mob's aggro radius and then go to max range and let out a Lightning Bolt. Immediately after the Lightning Bolt leaves your hands, cast Chain Lightning so the two hit the mob at almost the same time, as Chain Lightning has no travel time. Then cast either Frost Shock or Flame Shock, whichever you like. Frost Shock will ensure a slow from start to finish, and Flame Shock is a nice dot. Then continue to cast Lightning Bolt and or Chain Lightning until the mob is dead. Elemental DPS is by far the highest with an average of 266.89 DPS, which is significantly higher than any other build. And I didn't even use Elemental Mastery once at any of my pulls because of its long 3-minute cooldown. So, you have even more DPS potential with either Nature's Swiftness or Elemental Mastery than what I am reporting here. Next, let's check out the Restoration leveling build. I swear, it's really not that bad. You do lose DPS, that's true, but you will make it up in survivability and dungeon healing potential in my opinion. If you are actually interested in leveling Resto, I highly suggest checking out my video dedicated to leveling as Resto Shaman. The link is in the description and will be a clickable link at the end of the video. In that video, I go over a bit more than just the basics. As far as the build is concerned, I go with this. It is a tad different than what I showed in my resto video, as I switched some healing focus for Nature's Guidance for some extra hit. I think this is more important as you really suffer from missing when you are restoration. As far as rotation and gear goes, I prefer to mirror the Enhancement dagger and shield rotation and stat priority. So that means stack strength, agility, and stamina, but as with any build, make sure to have a set of healing gear at the ready, as you will be asked or expected to heal in dungeons. Of course, you could also mirror an elemental shaman and be a caster as resto and stack intellect and spell power. However, I personally like going more enhancement, as I feel it is more consistent and survivable. The average DPS is low at 115.88, but this is not significantly different from a dagger and shield enhancement build with flame tongue, nor is it significantly different from the hybrid build we will discuss next. Overall, resto has the least amount of RNG with no flurry to proc. The DPS is very consistent, albeit low. Also, using mana tide totem every cooldown will allow you to drink a lot less. Finally, there's the hybrid spec. This spec is a pretty even mix between enhancement and elemental, and takes the best of both worlds, if you will. The spec ends with 1 point in weapon mastery and enhancement, and 1 point in elemental fury and elemental. You won't have the healing potential and totem mana efficiency as the enhancement specs from the resto talents, but you will make up for it with cheaper shocks and lightning spells. I personally would stack strength, agility, and stamina as in the enhancement specs, as you will primarily use a one-hander, preferably a dagger, to do damage with your choice of flame tongue or wind fury. The rotation is almost identical to the enhancement specs, with one major difference: you don't have Stormstrike. Instead, I start the pull after laying down my totems with a lightning bolt, followed by a flame shock. Then I continue as normal, white hitting and regenning mana as my lightning shield fades off. A great thing about this build is that if you get a clear cast proc, cast chain lightning for some good and free extra damage. There is something to think about if you're considering any of the enhancement builds or the hybrid build. You don't have to use both flame shock and lightning shield. You can use one or the other to conserve more mana. Most people recommend not using lightning shield as it is a very expensive spell. That choice is entirely up to you. If you don't mind drinking, lightning shield away. Now we can compare all the builds in one big plot. Each box represents the range of values for each build. Here's an image to help you really understand how to read a box plot. Pause the video if needed. Box plots are much more powerful than bar graphs, as they show the range of the values in 2 dimensions, not just the maximum. The letters on top of each plot signify significance. If 2 boxes share a letter, that means they are not different from each other statistically. For example, Restoration is not significantly different from dagger and shield or their hybrid build, but is significantly different from two-handed fast, two-handed slow, and elemental. I would perhaps take some time to look at this plot and see what is actually different from what. If you want to see the p-values for every pairwise comparison, here's a table for you. I suggest pausing the video if you are interested. Also, here's a table with every single possible pairwise comparison, including the ones I did with Wind Fury weapon and Rock Butter weapon, so you can actually look at the comparisons with every possible combination. Remember, if the p-value is 0.05 or lower, the difference between the two builds is significant. So, as you can see, the one-hander and shield builds are similar to each other. The two-handed builds are somewhat grouped together, while the elemental spec really sits by itself. But, and this is a big but, DPS is not the only thing you should care about when leveling. What about speed and survivability? Well, let's get into that now. This table represents a balanced leveling experience with both PvP and PvE healing included, in addition to DPS, mana efficiency, which is a metric for leveling speed, and survivability. Each category can take on a value from 1 to 4, with 1 being bad and 4 being very good. One thing you should probably notice is that the totals are really similar, but what you really should focus on are the strengths and weaknesses of each build. As you can see, for example, the resto spec is great at dungeon healing but low on DPS, while the elemental build is great at DPS but not very survivable. You may also notice that two-handed builds have lower mana efficiency than the one-handed builds. This is due to the fact that not having a shield will require you to heal more, and heals cost mana. These are the things I would focus on over the actual totals. I also created a table for those of you who are not planning on rolling on a PvP server, or who aren't interested in battlegrounds but love to heal. When you remove the PvP metric, things open up a bit, with resto leveling of course being the obvious winner, and builds like the hybrid spec not being the best option as it has no resto talents. Also, the two-handed builds drop a lot because of their prowess in PvP. I've also created a table for those of you who could care less about healing and want to DPS or PvP, or both. In this scenario, the one-handed enhancement build really shine, as their superior survivabilities make them good choices for leveling. But, of course, if you want to see big numbers and pwn noobs, then two-handed builds are the way to go. And let's not forget elemental, with the ability to nuke alliance players from afar. If we take the average of the totals in all three scenarios, you can see that the one-handed shield enhancement build and the hybrid build squeak by at the top spot. In my opinion, this is due to the jack-of-all-trades archetype these builds seem to exude. Of course, these values are subjective, and my opinion. I'd like to hear your thoughts below. At the end of the day, pick the spec that speaks to you and the one that you will have the most fun with. I made this video to inform, not to pressure anyone into a certain spec or build. Just want to make that clear. Let's now talk about speed leveling. If you want to get to level cap fast, you picked the wrong class. Sorry to tell you that, but when it comes to speed, Shaman are average levels at best. But if you want to get to 60 relatively quick and want to play Shaman, regardless of the build and spec you choose, then I suggest not running dungeons at all actually. Don't get me wrong, I love dungeons, but they aren't the fastest leveling experience, even if you have all the quests. For the fastest leveling, I suggest grinding mobs and completing quests that are easy to get to and easy to complete and will require you to grind mobs as the quest objective. Even though they are epic, I would shy away from doing quests that make you travel around Azeroth and bring letters to NPCs all over the world or gathering hard to find reagents and items. Do the quests that make sense and don't make you stray all over the world. If you do grind, kill mobs that are 1 to 2 levels lower than you. I know what you're going to say. Melderon, you get more XP from mobs that are higher level, or at least at your level. That's true, but your rate of killing mobs will be much higher if they are 1 to 2 levels lower than you, which will translate to more XP per hour. Just a suggestion that's been substantiated by many others. There are videos out there that outline some great places to grind mobs. I will put some in the description, including Tips Out's video on grinding areas. Also, let's go over mana efficiency, as I think it is the most important metric to consider when speed leveling, as drinking will slow you down and cost you money. Here are some tips. Number 1. Never use high ranks of Earthshock to interrupt unless you are maximizing DPS. Rank 1 interrupts just as well as any other rank, and using it, especially at higher levels, will cost you way less mana. Always have rank 1 on your bars. Number 2 is to kite mobs to your totems. Strength of Earth and Grace of Air lasts a long time, so save yourself the mana of constantly placing these down by bringing your enemies within their ranges of effect. Number 3 is ask a mage for some water. Of course, this will not really decrease your downtime, but it will be more gentle in your pocket. Not having enough money at level 40 for your mount will definitely slow your leveling speed down, as it's 20% faster than Ghost Wolf. If you want to hear my tips and tricks for getting enough money for your mount, check out my guide, which will be at the end of the video, and a link will be in the description. Number 4 is to use Mana Spring Totem or Healing Stream Totem depending on the build you choose. I recommend Mana Spring for tanky builds like the Resto build, the Daggers Shield build, and the Hybrid build, as you will take less damage because of your shield. Healing Stream is better for two-handed builds, and the Elemental build as you will take more damage. The less you drink and the less you heal will increase your leveling speed. And number 5, finally, is to use mana potions whenever you can. If you have alchemy, you will have a lot of them, but even while leveling, you will pick up a good amount from mobs. Don't be afraid to use them during a fight or between pulls. If you want to save them for dungeon healing, just save the best ones for that and use the lower ones while grinding. Lastly, let's talk about race selection. In my opinion, pick the race you want, but if you are hell-bent on getting to 60 as fast as you possibly can, racials can have somewhat of an effect. If you are concentrating on melee, I would go with Orc, as Blood Fury, Axe Specialization, and Hardiness will potentially increase your DPS and uptime. Also, Hardiness is awesome for PvP. If you are focused on an Elemental and want to heal at endgame, I would go with Troll, as Berserking will decrease your cast time on spells and melee hits as well. However, I believe Blood Fury is better for melee. Also, Regeneration is really nice for some constant health regen. And since you may be killing a ton of beasts while grinding, Beast Slaying is awesome with an additional 5% damage to beasts. Tauren is great as a catch-all, as Endurance will increase your hit points, and War Stomp is great for situational AoE stun. Both of these have their perks while leveling, of course. I can't tell you how many times War Stomp has saved me while leveling or in dungeons. Also, if you plan on being an herbalist, Tauren is the way to go. And nature resistance is nice in some circumstances. That about covers it all, ladies and gentlemen. Hopefully now you have a better idea of what spec you want to level with and why. Please tell me in the comments what spec you are aiming for and your reasons for doing so. Also, let me know what I forgot or what needs clarification. Let's make this a hub for Shaman leveling. If you like this video, please leave a like below. If you enjoy this type of content, or are interested in other types of videos we make here at Def Camp and Melderon TV, don't forget to subscribe and stay tuned for more Def Talk interviews with WoW creators and enthusiasts, Melderon's classic WoW vlogs, and Super Plate Brothers Let's Plays. Also join us on Discord to be part of the Def Camp and Melderon TV community, and follow us on Twitter for video updates and more. Links are in the description. Thanks for watching. This is Melderon, signing off. Peace, my Shaman brothers and sisters. May the ancestors be with you.